book discussion, Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. As I often do on this podcast, I discuss books that I read, partly to keep a record of my own reading, but also, like I said many times, it is incredibly important for hedge fund managers to read. It doesn't really matter what you read, I think, as long as it's some sort of thinking involved, because I think reading is conditioning of the mind. Like a martial artist that does conditioning, it is necessary to keep your core strength, to keep your flexibility, to keep your endurance, and all these things apply to the mind as much as they apply to the body. And I think reading books is what conditioning would be as an equivalent to body training. So that's why I'm doing this. I can't emphasize enough how important it is. This is a great book. This is a book that is entertaining. I think it's very deep. I think it's very emotional. I think it's a phenomenal read. It's not a story. There's no murders and all that stuff, but it's a story about Malibu, about sex, drugs, and rock and roll in Los Angeles between the 1950s and the 1980s. So that's fun, and I think it's kind of one of those packaged goods where you think you're getting a nice candy, but you're actually getting a real meal with lots of nutrition. This is a Not Eating Wrong podcast. It's September 13th, 2021. This is Krim Delco. For the day, the fund is down 1.3%. The market's up 25 basis points. For the year, we're up 13.2%. The market's up 19.2%. We're underperforming by 7%. Malibu Rising is a book about a family. It's a book about love. It's a book about commitment and the lack thereof. And it's also a book about fire. It's a book about starting, destroying, and then rebirth. So it has a lot of biblical, it has a lot of biblical references: the brotherly love and fight, the betrayal of brothers, the fire that extinguishes everything, and as it does that, restarts new lives. This is certainly part of this story. So I'm not going to talk a lot about the content. The purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So talking about books in that context really is sometimes a little bit of a stretch, but I still want to do it, like I said, because it's conditioning of the mind. So what I'm trying to do here is just convey my thoughts. And my thoughts are my thoughts. Like anything that requires knowledge or thinking or creative thinking, this has nothing to do with me telling people, well, this is how it is. This is what the story here is. If you read Malibu Rising, this is what you're going to learn, or anything like that. This is a very personal thing. This is what I came across while reading this book, and that's why it's so important. So to me, there's three things. Number one, commitment. There are characters in this book that have a tremendous amount of commitment, to the point where it's almost painful to see how much they commit to causes that most of the time don't pan out. And then there's the other side, the lack thereof. So there's I think Taylor Reid Jennings, the author of this book, she did a very good job in painting the positive and negative of commitment. And it just makes you think. For me, for myself, I'm in that position very often. Where do I commit? I think, what do you commit to is one of the most crucial questions in life. Who is your spouse, your kids, your family, your friends, your job, your sport, your favorite painting? We all have different things we commit to. And sometimes they're for a lifetime, sometimes they're just for a while. For example, right now, I am committed to studying the life of Alberto Giacometti, and that is something that I'm not going to do for all my life. In fact, I haven't been doing it ever since until now. I did have phases in my life where I spent deep time understanding artists, in particular Pablo Picasso. I had a while, maybe in my early 20s, I think, or maybe late teens, when I spent a couple of months in Portugal. Actually, I was in Portugal, and that's funny because in this story Portugal comes up too. And I was just sitting on the coast of Nazaré and studying Pablo Picasso. So I do have these types of bursts Right now it's Alberto Giacometti. I am right now in Croatia, and I will most likely travel to Venice from here and visit a few painters there, see a few painters that influenced Alberto Giacometti, uh, in particular Tintoretto, and then from there hopefully make the way to the Bergel, the valley of Bergel, where Giacometti grew up, which is close to St. Moritz. So back to the story, Malibu Rising. Commitment, like I said, it's sometimes it's for a lifetime, sometimes it's not. That depends. In this book, it comes across as, in particular, the commitment of people towards each other, family, sisters, brothers, fathers, sons, mothers. All of that is being discussed. And actually, the book, you could say, has that is one of the threads in the book that goes across from the beginning till the end. And there's no right or wrong. I think Taylor Jenkins Reid is not trying to put a blame. I don't think she's judgmental. I think I don't know the author very well, so I can't tell what exactly she's after. But I think from her bibliography, I can see she has a tremendous understanding of Hollywood and the history of Hollywood, and I think she's trying to portray a contemporary picture of Hollywood. And Hollywood is a symbol of people that have enormous amounts of talent, that are famous, that have lots of issues that they can't show in their public life. So this duality of public versus private life. So all of these things, I think, come very well across in this book. And Jennings is not judging these people, but she's just showing in plain view how they are. The main character, one of the main characters, is a famous singer. He could be Frank Sinatra. I mean, that level of fame. It's a fictional character, but I would say Frank Sinatra would be a good analogy. So incredibly famous, old-fashioned, famous singer, and then his family has different levels of fame. Everybody's famous here. Everybody is successful. This could also be a little bit of an analogy to the Kardashian family. So everybody in the family is incredibly successful in their own ways, building out their own innovation stacks, to use our own terminology here, which means it shows that you can have enormous amounts of success in your own way, and it doesn't absolutely matter if you're talented in X. If you can use your whatever talent you have, you find it and you can apply it in Y or Z or whatever else area. But back to this duality of incredible commitment and then also lack of commitment, this duality of being in the public eye and also playing these two dual roles. All of that comes across really well in the book. I think as a takeaway for me in this kind of environment, I would say that I find it very difficult. I am not an LA person. I can't have two faces. So I would not be very good in playing a role like being a famous person in Los Angeles, for example, at least not as far as the cliche is concerned. And just if you allow me a digression here, I have lived in New York City for a long time. I am now living in the Bay Area. So I can tell that there are definitely, at least in those big metropolitan areas, I also actually spent some good time in Chicago. So I have spent a decent amount of time in big metropolitan areas of the United States. There is definitely cultural differences. New York City is a city of vanity, of drive, of success, but first and foremost, I would say if I had to put one word in New York City, it would be vanity. If I had to put one word for Chicago, it would be, what would it be? I don't know. Chicago is a little bit different. Chicago, in my view, lacks that kind of, it's hard to put it in one word. It's a mix of Midwestern values. It's a mix of money making, of hardship, of modesty, and still extravagance. So Chicago is a bit more complex. So let's put Chicago on the side. Bay Area, I would say, definitely change the world. This is it. Everybody in the Bay Area thinks they can change the world. Everybody in the Bay Area has the feeling that they can actually do something incredibly important with their lives, and not important in a way like writing a book or make a movie, but making a big contribution. through technology, through companies, through building a company. Even my son says that he's not worried about his future because if he doesn't make it in his whatever he's talented in, then he'll just be friends with somebody who's going to be the next Jeff Bezos. This is a mentality that permeates across the Bay Area, and that is so you have all these things, like you have, of course, you have vanity, you have jealousy, but I don't think the difference between the Bay Area and New York, I always say, is that both areas are incredibly competitive. But the difference is that if in New York you told somebody, I'll give you the title, you don't have to work for it, people will take it. In the Bay Area, they will still want to work for it and win that title. So that's the difference. Now, back to LA, I think LA, from what I can gather, my visits there, my friends there, is an unbelievably interesting town with unbelievable creativity, probably the most creative town in the world. But it has this duality between I have a public picture and I have a private picture. And that's something that I personally, I'm just not evolved for that. I'm not trained for that. I don't know how, I wouldn't even know how to do it. So back to the book, Malibu Rising, I think, like I said, first thread is commitment and lack thereof. Second thread, it's just pure and simple love. Love, in a sense, what does it mean? What is love? Love, family, love, I mean, love between family members, love between people. Again, love and lack thereof, both very well. Reid works with dualities very well, builds characters that have these extreme points of view when it comes to, let's say in this particular case, love. And very, very successful, in my view, very well done, because you really feel for these characters. You absolutely understand these characters. With what I read, and I don't know if she has written her book in a way that it can be filmed or it has that movie character, because it's very well done. It's simple, it's crisp, but still deep. It's not complicated. This is not Scott Fitzgerald trying to bloom you up with language that you don't understand half of what he's saying. This is maybe a modern version of Steinbeck, like clear, crisp, to the point, entertaining and deep. So very well done. Again, I am a big fan of this lady, and I will read more books of her. But and love is, I think, love is something that really it interests me in many ways. What is love? I think we don't need to discuss that. It's not something we need to define. We're not Wittgenstein here, but we can tell stories about it. We can explain what it means. The love between siblings, the love between a man and a woman, the love between a woman and a woman, a man, and all that stuff. I think the point is, one of the big things that Reid in this book is that love has a lot to do with dependency, that love has a lot to do with needs and selfishness. But it's in a way that I don't think the word selfishness, or it doesn't maybe merit this word because it just has this negative connotation. But I would still use it because, let's say, there are a couple of siblings in this book that go through tough times, and they certainly have a very strong bond. And I would say love. And that love is just grown out of necessity, plain and pure. It's not something, love is not an idealistic thing where you do something because you have to, or everybody should, or whatever. And I had these conversations with my own spouse, with my own partner, and I never had it, but if I had it with my son, I would say the same thing. Look, I don't think I am supposed to love you. I'm not sure it's a moral objective, but there are certain things that make me want to love you, and it's a complex thing, personality, but also dependency. I think dependency, that's a word that I think permeates through this particular book. So every time we encounter a situation where there is love, there is also dependency. And when there's the lack of love, there is also all the pitfalls of dependency when you depend on somebody and they're not there. But I think just to finish maybe this particular thread of the conversation, I would say that what Reid shows in this book is that you fundamentally need to be able to love and be loved. I think there is no way, and this comes across in this book in several occasions, several scenes, that if you don't have that, you cannot survive. And you have to have it on different levels. There's a love between man and woman, there's a love between mother and child. These are different types of loves, and they can't compensate for each other. That's another very important thing. This is maybe one of the most important messages of the book. Don't think that, well, I'm married and I don't know, I found a woman of my love, I'm not going to have kids. It doesn't work like that. The other way around also, fine, I'm divorced, I still have my kids. It doesn't work like that either. It's unbelievably important to have all levels of love your siblings, love your parents, love your kids, love your job. You have to do that. And I think the final thread in this book is about fire. It's about destruction and renewal. And that's something that, of course, also permeates in our hedge fund. We talk a lot about disruption. We talk about iteration. We talk about making mistakes. We talk about Popper and iteration, making mistakes, learning from mistakes. These are all iterations that end up in the same place, which is kind of what a fire does. A fire is a healthy thing. In this particular case, a fire actually happens, a real fire. The story is in California, so doesn't surprise people that there are fires in California, of course. But the fire has, even though it's a negative thing, it destroys value, not lives, fortunately. But in this particular book, it does destroy value, but it also destroys a story. It destroys something which wasn't good, and it builds sort of the ashes. It builds the potential for a new beginning, and that's great. And I think that's probably the most important thing for us, for Orange Capital Partners, when we look at the world, when we look at business, when we look at ideas, people, anything like that. We always look for iteration. I think for people that have been listening to this podcast series regularly, I hope that this by now is absolutely paramount. We at Orange Capital Partners, we're only interested in iterations. If situations don't iterate, if there is either institutional or whatever reason that things don't change, then we're not interested. We don't care about, what that means in practical terms is that we really don't care a lot about what is. We only care about the process in how is whatever is going to change. And then hopefully we have what's called an innovation stack. We have the processes in place to build an innovation stack around what is going to change, and hopefully it's changing towards a goal that has a lot of impact, that is better than what we have today, and also has the potential maybe to disrupt things that are already there, which aren't very good. Disruption, in our view, is simply the lowering cost of iteration. That's what disruption is. And we are also, we've spoken about how learning is in a sense just another way of talking about iteration. What is it we do when we learn? We have a certain model of the world or a certain fact set of the world, and then we iterate, we learn from mistakes, and add to that or subtract to that, and then we just keep getting better at let's say creating knowledge about a certain thing. So to summarize, Malibu Rising, again, a great book, has three particular stories for me, in my view. The first one is the question of commitment and lack thereof. The second one is the question of love and lack thereof. And the third is the symbol of fire as a force of destruction and also as a laying the ground for renewal, for better things to come. Thank you.